Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
pasa.
we know each other. So I just want to introduce myself. I'm Laura Hernton of the City College English Department in New York. We're broadcasting from around many spots here. We're still waiting for a few people to show up. This event was originally planned for March at City College, but due to the virus creeping around our globe, we canceled it and then we reinvented it thanks to David and Lori Shire and Alden Nielsen for agreeing to reformat the whole approach. We're going to start with we'll be talking a lot about Umbra tonight, but I just want to start with a poem, the poem for which the journal and the Umbra group was named, a poem by Lloyd Anderson called Umbra, and Tonya Foster has agreed to read a 5-minute version of this very long but gorgeous poem. So Tonya?
Okay, I also thank you, Laura, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. Thank you to David Henderson, who would show up at the Center for Humanities and tell me these amazing stories. Also visited me in the hospital and told me amazing stories.
And the great dinner we had for Umbra on the anniversary.
And the great dinner we had for Umbra.
With all these people, yes.
That was amazing.
That was wonderful.
So, I wanted to start with just saying something, and this is something I got from Tom Dent, who I spent a little time going through his archive, and he was a poet, playwright, essayist, oral historian, biographer, teacher, arts educator, arts administrator, active in the civil rights movement. He worked for the Legal Defense Fund, the Free Southern Theater, New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival, as well as, which is significant, a founding member of Umbra. Dent described the Umbra Writers' Workshop as distinct from other groups in that it was a group of writers whose work was expressive of surrealism and impressionism combined with traditional Black protest. As early as '77, there is audio of a television interview with Dent in which he talks about Black poetry in Umbra. What's clear is that the Umbra Writers' Workshop and its development of a radical aesthetic community marked by diversity of aesthetic approaches and activism has had marked and expansive influence on contemporary writing communities. So this is from the poem by Lloyd Addison, Umbra. My sun has gone down in drum-sweet penumbra. The mood of this rhythm, my body is Umbra. And the totem line behind the three-faced light taboo, decline the flesh cup curve. The postman asked, what information in a dress envelops this female? Impertinence posturing behind us. This is not thigh, 10-inch pound distance, weight, focus. This is the weight of death. Full to fascination, bottom riddle, and but dense. One face frontal curve, or straight instant line. Say designers of fashion, no rear view is beautiful to address, but to self. One clean, brief declension is to write, to inform, and to cloche, and to clothe, to invite. This is the interval of a question addressing the male. The umbral body is in penumbral field. A two-way cup curving, female, a handful of image, an armful, storm, a mouthy world waiting. And the lips that kiss you in penumbra have arms. A body molds the darkness, is thigh-pressed, cradle, abdomen, met, and breasts, the umbral breasts have softness. And the silence, neuter feminine night, is sighing verb breaths to love. And handsome, she has fingers to caress herself down. Circular, the darkness is erect, feverish at its back. The stars perspire. Pressed to her back, the hands of the arms that engulf her, hold her enwrapped. Cool lips press against her throat. Erect, the darkness is spinning in an arc PM space, a perpendicular in its equator, a right angle in its tropic lights. Erect, the darkness stands, goes gentle merry-go-round in the wheel, with a rub in that trouble hub. The axle oil gives ease. Spoke, said muffled, mute, hot ground to be is being is, the night pitch, the feeling pie. Love is a good, gentle cut. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's also what she read 5 minutes. That was good. This is a tough poem.
It's a very tough poem.
Yeah.
It's a very complicated poem.
We
Very
got some film from
very
doing that.
beautiful. I'll just begin by talking a little bit about the subject. When young Black intellectuals and writers gathered every Friday night in the early 1960s at a Lower East Side tenement apartment rented by New Orleans native Tom Dent, they shared their creative and poetry, but also, quote, a sense of outrage with a missionary zeal borrowed from the Southern civil rights struggle, as Lorenzo Thomas wrote in his 1978 essay on Umbra, the shadow world. The workshop group they formed, Umbra, which was named for the poem that by Lloyd Addison, Tonya just read, became the name of a poetry journal based on this New York City writers collective responding to the imperatives of civil rights. Umbra was a unique movement in its time, a collection of writers as well as other artists, music, dance, visual arts, and it would feed the various artistic streams of what became the 1960s US Black arts movement before Leroy Jones / Amiri Baraka started his Black arts repertory theater and school in Harlem in 1965 and would be credited with giving rise to the Black arts. The Umbra poets, including Thomas Dent, David Henderson, Lorenzo Thomas, Calvin C. Hernton, Ishmael Reed, Norman Pritchard, Lennox Raphael, Brenda Walcott, Rashidah Ismaili, and so many others joined together to generate a revolutionary new Black poetry voice and aesthetic. Our panel brings together Henderson, one of the founding members of that early 60s Umbra group and an editor of its journal, along with two distinguished scholars in African-American poetics, Alden Lynn Nielsen and Lori Ramey Shire. And they're also distinguished co-editors, Laura Vrana and David Grundy, the latter who has recently published a book specifically on the Umbra moment. This 2-hour program will start with 3 short talks by these special guests or panelists. It will include a short break, and then we will also have time for questions. And then the second part will be a series of readings with, well, Tonya just read because she has another event to go to, Tyrone Williams, Jean-Philippe Marcoux, Janelle Poe, Dudrick Bevins, and I will be weaving in and out some recollections written by some of the Umbra poets. This is an event sponsored by the English Department of the City College of New York, and tonight we also want to pay special tribute to you, David Henderson. Not only are you a legendary editor, poet, biographer, multimedia jazz poetry performer, but as many people don't know, in the later 60s, he worked as a City College of New York professor of the program SEEK, S-E-E-K, now legendary, working with Adrienne Rich and many other poets and writers in that community that help support economically challenged New York City minorities in their higher education. And David also helped to fight, led the fight to help establish City College, the first Black Studies department of City College, which is now, alas, only a program, underfunded as usual, has been through many, many ups and downs. But without David Henderson there to lead the charge, I doubt it would have ever existed. So David, we want to thank you. And this whole event started when I had the opportunity to meet David at the Bob Kaufman events last fall in New York. And I was mighty impressed when I met him and he told me some of these stories from the trenches back in the 1960s at City College. Trenches, unfortunately, we haven't dug ourselves out of yet, David, but the fight goes on. So anyway, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. And David, let's turn it over to you since we did rearrange the schedule. And David's going to offer us some of his own perspectives and recollections of the Umbra movement. And also he did some significant editing of the Umbra Journal those couple of years that the journal existed. He still lives in the Lower East Side. And he's still a teacher, a writer, an editor, performer. And we treasure your presence in the community, David. So, and I guess you're gonna also read some of your poems. So.
A couple, yeah. But I wanna, and I see I can go all the way to 8 o'clock,
Great.
It was the last position I had at CUNY, or a semi position, was I was a fellow in the Humanities Center for Humanities, and thanks to Amiri Baraka,
who's here tonight? Yes.
The woman who went back, oh God, who went back to Ireland? Oh God. Anyway, I'll come back to it. But anyway, getting to and thankfully we had a celebration that Tanya really put together. Did all the hard work. We had a dinner. We had a conference. We brought all the scholars, including Alden Nielsen and Laurie Shire, and that was a great festival. I finally met a lot of the critics whose jurisprudence, whose area is Black writing and Black studies. Anyway, that was great. So,
we might differentiate. You were at the CUNY Grad Center. And, and City College is up in Harlem, and I am not at the Grad Center, and I wasn't part of any of that. So
I didn't say you were, but anyway,
just wanted to because they really are very different institutions.
Oh my God! But anyway, of course they are, of course. But when I went up to CCNY lately, I hadn't been there in decades, and they had built a building that looked like a Star Trek vehicle, that was on several layers and taking off over Amsterdam Avenue, looked like it was heading towards Newark, New Jersey. One of the greatest things, or a terrible thing, was to lose that department of Black Studies, because it would be nice if we could have done our own research and fired and hired, but this is New York City, one of the biggest cities in the world. They have no African American Studies department, and luckily, Barbara Christian and I, we worked in that together, and I came in with her, and Wilfred Carty, who ran the whole thing and should have been the director, but anyway, he wouldn't have fought with people he shouldn't fight with. But anyway, we went out to Berkeley, and their PhD program is still going after all these years. So this is it's a tragedy for New York that they don't even recognize the great gift that the Black people gave to them, and not just the Harlem Renaissance. By the way, they published Claude McKay's book that they found after 100 years at Columbia University, thanks to a professor there. I got the book. It does something about eyeballs, but it's about the rift between black people in the Communist Party, something like that. Anyway, when we started Umbra, there were like 3 or 4 black writers that people knew about, and it was always thought that there would only be room for one at a time. And so there was a lot of tension among black writers because they knew they would not get a shot. And of those 4 was Gwendolyn Brooks, Ralph Ellison, Richard Wright, and Langston Hughes, who had come from the Harlem Renaissance. And Dale Langston, when we had our workshop, Langston was our angel. He encouraged us. He knew most of the younger writers, which is something that he and Gwendolyn Brooks impressed upon us, that he knew Calvin Hernton and Tom Dent and Oliver Pitcher and a few others. And he was very friendly. I got to know him, and he gave me advice. He gave us all so much and invited us to his home. And one thing, I went to a meeting of his, to his house during business hours, and he had like 3 secretaries going around, and he was working on something, but he also had time to serve us some drinks and to chat with us intermittently, and I couldn't believe that he had mastered that. It was very beautiful. But the Umbra workshop had some wonderful people, and I'm sure you're going to hear their names. But and I would love to go through each of them. Have such a wonderful situation going for them. But I also want to say, though, it's very important. The origins of Umbra are still in effect. In other words, the mission that we had when the workshop split, disbanded, was that people wanted to go into communities and work in other areas, because we had a workshop that was so critical, so difficult, that some people would break down in tears. But the thing is that if you have a workshop, and if you want to sit, not waste your time, then you want to hear what people really think about what you write. And some of the people who were criticized came back with such beautiful work. They just leaped years by getting an honest critique of their work. And so now, of course, we know that in some of these schools, that's not always the case. I taught a poetry class once at UC San Diego, and that's the last class I taught, except for one at Wesleyan. I did go to a few colleges. I was kind of against it, but that's a whole, another story. Umbra was wonderful though, and people used to crowd into Tom Dent's apartment, and including a lot of the people from SNCC and SCLC. He was a good friend of a lot of the people there. We made the magazine in Constance Motley's office. She was the chief consul then. And then there was another, but we made the magazine after hours on the typewriters of the Legal Defense, the Legal Defense Fund. And so that's some idea of how close we were to the movement. And that's what we said in the entree, in the beginning preface to the first issue, is that we wanted to really be able to, as was so well said by the intro, infuse that Black criticism thing with a lot of the beauties of poetry. And of course, being down on East 2nd Street, which by the way, I have a whole bit about, and which I'll get to at some point, hopefully in my 15 minutes. But it was a wonderful thing. Now my clock stopped working. Well, there you go, 5 minutes. So this area that we're in now, we're bullet spaces, and thanks to Maggie Wrigley and Castrucci, and we're John Farris, the great poet who is going to be put on a mural with Steve Cannon, who just died last year, who founded the Gathering of the Tribes. He had a group called the Gathering of the Tribes, which was trademarked at $300. Took 2 years, but that's going to continue, that whole movement. And Steve's is across the street from Bullet Space on 3rd Street, right near Avenue C. And 3rd Street is a little bit more in the center of the block. And at the end of the block is Avenue D that has a long project that goes not only from 14th Street down to Houston, but across Houston, down to Delancey, across the Grand Street, all the way down to the East River. And there's nothing but housing projects there. And this is an area that is not like the East Village at all. And this is the place where the New Yorican Poets Cafe across 3rd Street and C developed right there near C, and where Slugs was, and the Old Reliable, which is where we danced to music, and they had a cabaret license, and so we could hang out in there after the Umbra meetings and talk. And then there was another place around the corner on 2nd Street and C called The Stone that was owned by a very well-known musician on the scene here. And then there was Verda May Grosvenor, lived on 2nd Street around the corner on C, you know, and so you can see that there was some energy here, and it wasn't appreciated by the people that be, but we got a lot out of it. And that was the important thing. And it was a hugely multicultural group that was down here when we came down here in the early 60s, and it's nothing like that today, except in this area, they managed to hold on to a lot of the multiculturalism of it. And I'm making speeches all around the subject. But you know, Umbra disbanded right around the time after Malcolm X was assassinated. Before that, some Umbra poets, Ishmael Reed, Calvin Hernton, and myself, went up to Harlem during the 1964 riots and wrote poems about it and then published them in Umbra. So, you know, that was a great thing. Now in 65, after Malcolm got killed, and it really was very difficult for us. But Amiri Baraka came to us, Umbra, and he proposed that we help him to raise some money to start the Black Arts Repertory School. So we raised money down in the village, and people and musicians played for him, Archie Shep, Cecil Taylor, all those cats, you know, because there was the whole arts thing among people of color was very strong, you know, and so we raised the money for him, went up to Harlem, and all the people from Umbra supported him, or, you know, although we're in the process of disbanding. Joe Overstreet, who recently died, bless his soul, who came to Umbra later after we had disbanded, because Umbra never disbanded, you know. So he built the theater for Amiri up, a Black Arts building they had there. And all the Umbra people, Sun Ra came up and did courses and concerts. I read, all the poets read. I mean, it was a wonderful thing. But we would go back downtown at the end of the day, because this was our home and we lived in a multicultural environment. And that's what we wanted to do. Now, we got some flack from some of the people in the Black Arts movement, but we had to be strong and let them know, look, this is the way we did it. We all can't live in Harlem. And I tell you, I went up to a children's march in Harlem once recently, and the cops were hovering helicopters 6 stories over them, and it said, you know what, if this was an interracial society, more of an interracial society, this wouldn't happen. So, you know, the people were often victimized because of living in Harlem. But, you know, Black Arts, and I'm concluding now, people went all over the world when we disbanded. Ishmael went to Berkeley and served 30 years as a professor of writing. Lorenzo Thomas, who was the youngest, went to the military. He was an ROTC, so he was an officer, and he went to Vietnam, to Saigon. And when I read some of his writing about there, I said, I kind of thought, and said, instead of being a peacenik myself, and an activist and, you know, anti-war, I said, gee, I wish I had seen that, you know. Calvin went to Europe and wrote in England and then in Scandinavia, edited a book with Joe Burke on marijuana back in the mid-60s. You know, Tom went back south and started working and developing acts and raising money. And, you know, there was a woman named Amara Hicks, who was the last I heard out in California was on her deathbed, but she was one of the first people in Umbra, married to Calvin Hicks, a brilliant fellow who was a peripheral Umbra guy, but Amara was she said that she was Egyptian. She looked white, but you know, we didn't have to go into that. She could be whoever she wanted to be in the Umbra workshop. And we had white folks and Latinos and people come to our group because we were open to the public. And it was great seeing some of the freedom riders come to our meetings. And thank you. I'm gonna stop now because I could go on and on about it. But I edited I was a co-editor of the Umbra magazine, the 1 and 2, and then I edited the last 3 issues as an anthology, Umbra anthology, and our last one was Umbra Latin Soul, and Victor Hernandez Cruz was one of the editors with Jose Jimenez, who did it together, in Gonzalez Public Printing House in San Francisco on Market Street put it together. You know, and so we're gonna be out with all of those and new issues. And thank you, and thank you, Laura Hernton, for coming up to me all them times during the tributes to Bob Kaufman, who finally has a beautiful book that City Lights put out, and it's the way collected poems should be done. It's a beautiful example. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We'll have you back to read one of your poems second half.
Thank you.
Since we ran out of time here. Thank you. I mean, I knew it would be difficult because you have so much to say and so much history and so much knowledge going back to the 60s, and that's been like how many decades now? 5 decades of knowledge on this. So we really appreciate your presence here tonight. So we're going to go to Lori Shire. Are you there? Are you ready, Lori Shire? And let's see.
I don't see Lori on the participants list.
Can you hear me?
Put Emily Rose on.
Oh, there you are. Hi.
And JP says I have San Francisco in the background. I have no idea why.
So we're gonna turn it over to you. And Lori Shire is a very renowned African American poetry expert.
She's up there.
Lori, you're making me seasick. Hold still.
It was not easy to get in, I assure you. And I want to say 2 quick things. One is that one of the great experiences of my life is being given a tour of the Lower East Side by David Henderson. I will never forget every moment of it. And then secondly, Lennox Raphael is here, but he's not able to hear. So I'm trying to instruct him on how he can activate his audio, but he's trying.
Okay, good.
Can he be heard?
He can't hear. He can see, but he can't hear. So I told him to exit and try it again and click the join with audio button, and I'm trying. So if anybody can give Lennox a hand, he's really trying to get in.
Now,
he can't talk and be heard?
No, he can only. I'm trying. I'm working on it.
I think M. Rose might be able to help him out.
Yeah, M is a co-host now, so I don't know if there's anything you can do, M. Or
if he can help Lennox be able to hear, that would be wonderful.
Great.
Yeah, I'll try to figure it out.
I'll go ahead and let Lori take over. She's written a wonderful history of African American poetry that was just published by Cambridge. She's also working on a new collection with David Grundy. Is David here tonight? Is David here from the UK?
Should be.
David, are you here?
I don't see his name. Is he there?
I had a lot of trouble getting in. So David has prepared something beautiful, and I know he's planning to attend.
I hope he can.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, hello, David.
Hey, David. Okay, where are you, David? It's hard to see little tiles.
Well, I'm on here somewhere.
There you are.
I feel the same way.
So you are going to be co-editing with Lori Shire a volume on Calvin Hernton. And David has just published a couple of years ago, I think, the Black Arts Machine, which was on the Umbra and also Amiri Baraka. So we have, anyway, they're going to share the next, I don't know how to do a 2-panel thing here. Anybody? Dudrick, can we get both faces on the screen or not?
As long as we leave it on speaker view, it'll cut back and forth as they speak. So
Okay,
just
so let's do that.
I'm going to speak first and then David will follow.
Okay, sounds
Okay.
great. Okay.
Okay, I'm starting off with a poem by Calvin Hernton called The Distant Drum. I am not a metaphor or symbol. This you hear is not the wind in the trees, nor a cat being maimed in the street. I am being maimed in the street. It is I who weep, laugh, feel pain or joy. Speak this because I exist. This is my voice. These words are my words. My mouth speaks them. My hand writes. I am a poet. It is my fist you hear beating against your ear. I start off reading this poem by Calvin Coolidge Hernton, not only because it's become his poetic anthem, but also because it speaks his poetic truth. Calvin viewed himself above all as a poet and believed the poet's role was to speak out against injustice and reveal social problems. I chose this poem as the epigraph to bless the whole enterprise of my new book, A History of African American Poetry, a critical study of 4 centuries of this genre. That benediction indicates my profound respect for Calvin as a poet, who was also my teacher at Oberlin College, my friend, and my most important mentor. In many ways, it's fitting that he was named for a president known for choosing his words carefully. One of Calvin Coolidge's most famous sayings is, "The words of a president have an enormous weight and ought not to be used indiscriminately." This dictum matches Calvin Hernton's view of the poet's role from the time of his roots in Chattanooga, raised by his adored grandmother, Ella Estelle, whose name I call out with respect, Ashe. Calvin did speak softly and carefully, if by that we mean he was not a bombast or a braggart or a self-promoter, which his friend of many decades, Ishmael Reed, blames for his neglect as a poet. Reed tried to remedy that oversight by publishing both of Calvin's full-length volumes, Medicine Man and the Red Crab Gang, which bookend his poetic career. Calvin was a serious cat who spoke loudly and viscerally through his poems. It's not for no reason that he was nicknamed Socrates by the parents of poet Harriet Mullen and others during their college days at Talladega. Calvin was a poet of tremendous originality and brilliance who has been the victim of shameful stereotyping for speaking truth to power. In his literary and cultural criticism, he rightly connected sex with racism, for which he was reviled in many corners. Like so many other African-American poets, including those affiliated with Umbra, it's been a bridge too far to give due credit for the quality of outspoken poetry whose major aim is not polite complacency. Umbra was a powerful coalescing force in literary history because its energy and ethos made possible the future evolution of numerous figures connected to the workshop, journal, readings, and comings together. When Calvin decided he needed to go to New York as a young man because New York was the place young writers must go, Umbra became the fulfillment of his dreams. Many of my own students are now listed on major websites like Academy of American Poets and Poetry Foundation, for which I'm very proud. Yet it pains me that there is no listing for my own teacher, Calvin Hernton. Umbra and the poets associated with it have been undeservedly overlooked. I thank Laura Hinton and her colleagues at Interruptions and City College of New York for hosting this important symposium to rectify those decades of neglect. We're all blessed tonight by the presence of originary figures David Henderson and Lennox Raphael. Alden and I were proud to feature the poetry of many Umbra-related figures in our book, Every Goodbye Ain't Gone, including David, Calvin, Lorenzo, Ishmael, and others. I thank everyone who is making important efforts to bring long overdue acclaim to Umbra, including Wesleyan University Press, the publisher of the collected poems of Lorenzo Thomas, so superbly edited by Laura and Alden, and the selected poems of Calvin C. Hernton, which I'm really delighted to be editing with David Grundy. I also thank Cambridge University Press, which published a history of African American poetry, as well as Alden's classic book, Black Chant. I'm going to close by reading Calvin's poem, Terrorist, with its image of the black fist that's echoed in the distant drum. This poem was written for the September 15th, 1963 bombing at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, which murdered 4 children. In an era of no shaking hands, continued terrorism to Black citizens, and a president of indiscriminate words, the truth of this poem resonates and remains tragically relevant today. Terrorist, for the 4 Negro children murdered in Birmingham while praying to God. Like his stricken face stroke of midnight, torn by crack of thunder or dissonance of vowel, the deed like agonized tooth fell from his mouth and exploded. In a dark room and a crumbling heart, the deed conceived its victims, 91 nails in the breast of Christ. The deed made terror, ripped open flesh and bone. No one knew, not even himself, 8 fragile bones would never walk from that debris. I am the door, hammer me down, 91 and 4. They were like chrysanthemums, tender flesh cracked by thunder, unknown to his grotesque face. A revolution must draw blood. In the manacled chamber of our egos, what we do not know about death comes alive. And though love agonized there, when terror expires our frail hearts, hate is a bitter madness. For the 4 who died without tears, outside of cognition, their end is everlasting. Their beginning is eternity. To die young before the rodent of exchange imperils the flesh when you are innocent and immaculate to the paranoid itch is lamb's blood, is bread transubstantiated to galaxy. If I were loin from whose pain the ecstasy of these 4 little girls leaped, I would wail and weep, seek revenge, fly with shotgun through the streets. Yet I know when all this raving, tortured love and flagellating hatred is reckoned up to stars, those 4 will illuminate the dark more than a billion heavens. I wish I had died as they. Before thunder in your face is done, you will too. There shall be no shaking hands later on and forgetting. Blood will heave in your shattered streets, Birmingham. And God, the tornado shall rave down on you like an angered black fist, merciless and violent unto the blazing sun. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So I guess David Gundry is going to speak.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you, Laura, for organising. It's great that this event can happen, even if only in virtual space. It's about 1 in the morning here in London. So as Laurie mentioned, we're currently editing the selected poems of Calvin Hernton for Wesleyan University Press. And I'm going to start by reading an uncollected poem, which I think really speaks to some important questions about publication and the material trace of Umbra, which is what I'm going to go on to talk about. So this is Night Letter to John A. Williams, 4A EST. Out of print is a book with no pages, nothing but silence that like a spark struck in the dark dimly fades. Where are the sons of light, the flashing back, the night song, and the Captain Blackmen of all valor? Where is the tongue who cried, I am? Ours is a predicament of paradox, a heritage of shark teeth, eyesights, eardrums, and black hunger, shredded like confetti by the mammon Moloch. Out of print is like a book with no binding, nothing but the rustling sound of autumn leaves falling to ground outside a lonely lit window. The typewriter's harvest, the aching back, the high blood pressure of literacy trees that would fly, are shackled in stockhouses of remainder, scream as they burn, as they are poisoned by the American death and drop like starved cattle. Shall we marvel at this sight, or shall we write? So I first came across Calvin Hernton's work in Amiri Baraka and Larry Neal's Black Fire anthology while I was a student. Black Fire features a number of Umbra poets, so I discovered Hernton and Umbra at the same time, and it was just astonishing how he and all these poets were so unknown, as if they'd been almost completely written out of literary history. Hernton really is an astonishingly varied poet, poignant, pessimistic, defiant, working across blues, ballads, and the magnificent long, free verse poems like Medicine Man and The Coming of Kronos to the House of Night Song, which was published by Interim Books in 1964. His work traces the afterlife of slavery via urban insurrection, radical politics, sex, love, and death. So it's great that Wesleyan have given us the contract for this, and they've just published Alden and Laura's edition of Lorenzo Thomas' collected poems. And this all comes off the back of Alden and Laura's work with Every Goodbye Ain't Gone, the anthology which prints a number of Umbra poets. We're also seeing editions of poets like Russell Atkins and the Bob Kaufman book, which has already been mentioned. Although there's still little work on female poets, we still lack a good edition of the work of Jane Cortez, and someone like Brenda Walcott from Umbra is so far off the critical radar that it took me years even to track down a copy of any of her work. Mm-hmm. So that's one important thing, is that just getting this work into print so people can read it, full stop. And then there's other kinds of documentation. When the historical record is full of gaps or doesn't really exist, we have to reconstruct it. So in the 1980s, Lorenzo Thomas was assembling an annotated bibliography of Umbra, which was never published, but is in the Schomburg Center archives, and that informed his essays like The Shadow World, which has already been mentioned. So recently, I've also been assembling an Umbra bibliography, which is now book length. So I built on the Lorenzo Thomas bibliography and took it up to the present day. The main part of this bibliography is individual bibliographies for people who are members of the workshop or associated with it. So this is about 40 people with lists of work and the like. And it was just staggering the range of activities that people were involved with, and equally staggering how obscure people were, how hard it was to find information, even with everything supposedly now available on the internet at the click of a mouse. Library catalogs, books, all these things, it's just very, very hard to find in one place, let alone any information. So that's why events like this are so important. So the bibliography shows the huge range of work that emerges from Umbra. As people have been saying, Umbra is not just the period when the workshops happened, but in a sense, Umbra kind of still exists, or its legacy still exists. So doing this work, bibliography, writing the critical book on Umbra, which came out last year, and now editing the selected Calvin Hernton, also raises a few key questions I'll just mention briefly now. So one is how you gather material traces, how you do literary scholarship, editing, and so on, while keeping the poetry alive, not just making it into an archival artifact. And that's what events like this are doing by including poetry readings alongside papers. This isn't just a museum piece, this work is still electric and relevant and fresh. And the other question is how studying Umbra forces us to rewrite the historical narratives we have about American poetry, about poetry in general in the 20th century. Maybe narratives to do with the Black Arts movement in particular. We've just been hearing from David Henderson about the Black Arts and Baraka and Umbra's role in that. So who gets credited with things? But also just putting Umbra into the narrative of the history of poetry as a whole, so that we can see that these are major writers in whatever context they're viewed, and that this is not accurately reflected in the publication or the critical record. So the Umbra workshops lasted for just a few years, but if you look at the combined careers of everyone in Umbra beyond that immediate phase, there's a huge range of material which connects to so many important parts of literary and political history. You have Black Power, you have left-leaning internationalism, anti-imperialism, multiculturalism, literary experimentalism. There are so many connections, cross-connections, and so on. And I think the idea of the nexus really applies well here, something that links to several things at once. And this is perhaps why Umbra has been written out of literary history. Its presence challenges narratives that separate things from other things, that separate literature from politics, that pretend that all modernism was this monoracial white endeavor. And this is also why it's so important to put Umbra back into literary history and to emphasize it as a living tradition. So on that note, I'll end with another poem by Calvin Hernton, and this is The Wall. Wall. They were driven everywhere, and always from there were ghosts. She stroked the tiger's bladder, wait until April rolls down that river, and sing, where, oh, where, oh. Whispering in darkness, they say, the wall crumble into broken clocks. The unmake-up mind continued making speeches. She said, sweetheart, I love that naked desperado, where, oh, where, oh. Wall. And they were driven everywhere. Hey.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful. Thank you so much, David, for staying up so late and joining us all the way from the UK. And just wonderful to hear your work, and it's such intelligent and deep work, and we're greatly appreciative of your of that scholarship you are doing, and look forward to the selected that you and Lori Shire are putting together. And thank you, Lori, that was beautifully presented as well. So let us move on to Alden Lynn Nielsen and Laura Vrana. By the way, there are different Lauras here. And I am not a co-editor with Alden Nielsen. Laura Vrana, though, is, and they have put together an amazing collected poems of Lorenzo Thomas. It's a gorgeous book, and Wesleyan also, and I highly recommend all of these books. They're all incredible. So we'll just turn it over to Alden and Laura, and let you organize how you present what. But I think everyone knows Alden, Penn State, but over in Santa Barbara, just hanging out over with his wife there in Santa Barbara for the duration, as I call it. And I'll let you also introduce your co-editor, Laura.
Okay. Can everyone hear me now? Just go like that if you can hear. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, organization might be too exalted a term for what I'm about to do, but while I'm setting my timer, let me just say, I'm really sorry we weren't able to do this in New York as originally planned, but on the other hand, all kudos to Laura Hinton for herding poets, which has to be one of the more difficult tasks in the world. Because we're doing it this way, I'm entering the Zoom rooms of people who could never have attended the one in New York anyway. Yeah, so this is truly wonderful. Now, I wasn't actually at the festival that David Henderson was remembering earlier. To this day, you know, those of us who graduate from places like the University District of Columbia seldom get such invitations. But I'm really honored that people think I was there. I think that's sort of the poetic equivalent of people thinking you were on the stage at Woodstock or something like that. But it's great to be, you know, associated with so many friends here, especially people whose work has meant so much to me. I mean, just in this gathering, you know, Lori, Laura, I've actually been edited by Laura, by the way, Laura Hernton, you know, but Lori, David, Laura Vrana, there's so many people here who have contributed to the work I've been trying to do over the years. Now, I've always been told, I can't verify this for sure, but I've always been told that the oldest member of Umbra was Lloyd Addison, and that the youngest had been Lorenzo Thomas. And it's a sad fact that neither one of them is with us today. Lorenzo, of course, passed back in 2005, way too early. I think he was, what, 65 years old or something like that. And Lloyd Addison has just passed away more recently, just a couple of years ago. Shortly before Lloyd Addison passed away, he published a fairly large collection of his poetry from an obscure printer in India. You know? I know this because it took me quite a bit of work to manage to get a copy of that book, which was immediately followed by a series of emails from that printer in India trying to convince me that they should print all of my books too. I'm sure they had a price in mind for that, which is a way of underscoring something. If you look at the full run of Bo Coco, the journal that was published by Lloyd Addison, you see just what an amazing quantity of material there is there. And then you add to it that book that came out just before he passed away. We really need a collected Lloyd Addison or some kind of Lloyd Addison reader or something like that. We need a collected Oliver Pitcher. You know, the books that we're talking about today, the collected Lorenzo Thomas, the one that Laura and David were just talking about, we need a lot more than that. We actually need to reprint all of the Umbra material. You know, we could start with the Umbra anthology, but an Umbra reader would be nice too. And, you know, expanding beyond Umbra, there's never been a book by Gloria Trump. You know, we need to have something like that. As David mentioned, we need a collected Jane Cortez. But I need to get to Lorenzo Thomas, so I'm going to hit share screen here for a minute to bring up, I hope, some images. There we go. This is Lorenzo in the 1970s. Now, the participants box is now blocking the thing I need to use to move the photographs around, which is going to be inconvenient.
If you want, just tell me to move it and I will.
Okay, I don't think you can move the participants box as I'm looking at it, so I'm going to try something else. Here we go. I can't see participants now. Like David, I first encountered Lorenzo and the other Umbra writers in this book. Okay. Unlike David, I was encountering them as they were beginning to be written into literary history, not as they had been dropped out of literary history. I was a teenager when I found this book. One of the key things about finding this book was the recognition that radical revolutionary aesthetics was not inimical to the idea of a radical politics. The two could very much go together. At the time I was in graduate school, there were many people arguing that modernity wasn't somehow automatically authoritarian and so forth. You could only arrive at that conclusion by eliminating a whole lot of poetry, a whole lot of artists. So this book was a revelation in so many ways. The next time I saw the work of Lorenzo Thomas was here in the first issue of the journal Hoodoo, where I also saw the very young Harriet Mullen, my friend Jerry Ward, so many other people. And I'm pointing to this just because, along with the other work I was saying we need to do, we desperately need to bring back work having to do with the Black small presses of the time period. There's been a little bit of work on Broadside, a little bit of work on Third World Press, but nobody's really been doing work on these journals. We really have to get to this. This is Lorenzo Thomas at a Paul Laurence Dunbar conference in Dayton, Ohio in the 1970s. And again, this is important to recognize that these radical poets were still making bridges with that earlier mode of poetry and talking about it. When I met Lorenzo, which was in the mid-1980s, we immediately clicked because we had so much in common. We were both, you know, book people. We were both poets. We were both intrigued with music. We both played these instruments. And we wound up being, as I said in the introduction to Don't Deny My Name, we both became sort of a tag team going around to conferences and so forth. The one I remember most fondly is where my first AWP actually where we were talking about the work of Sterling Brown. And of course, we were assigned to 8 o'clock in the freaking morning at the AWP. But when we got there, Lucille Clifton was already sitting there because she had been a student of Sterling Brown. And we've already heard Lori talking about being a student of Calvin Hernton. This is another element we want to keep in mind. I was a student of Gil Scott Heron, Amiri Baraka, and C.L.R. James. So many of us have these intellectual legacies to celebrate. This is the book that Laura Verana and I have published, that is edited, that has come out from Wesleyan University Press. And because I'm trying to make sure that I actually hew to my 7 minutes, despite temptation, I'm going to close now with a poem from this book. This is one of the early poems by Lorenzo Thomas. It's called Fatiha, which some of you will recognize as the opening of a Quranic surah. Now, this poem has a Swahili epigraph, which I cannot read because I cannot pronounce Swahili. But the rough English translation is, "We will certainly win." And my eyes came straight to this poem when I was thinking about what to read here today, because this seems to speak so much to the moment that we're living in right now. Fatiha by Lorenzo Thomas. As the cell block has its wazin, you hear the call to liberate the mind, rifts of vision, haste of worry, thought, and desperation of radio, ballads so very slowly escaping the circled days, exceedingly slow, 1 3/4 inches per second, 6 or 7 ideas in an hour, blessing of non-activity, blessing of pertinent time, and to me, power. Rock floats in the caged air, but the riff is power. In one of myriad worlds, science of privacies, domains. Consider this technology of liberation. Consider this emission of the mantic force and grace. Our serpents, our sun, as even the Pope has a scarab, as even someone unworthy as me has the key. This star is our planet, and yes, we shall be free. Now I'm going to try to unshare. Here we go. Now it's going to be time for Laura Verana. I hope she's unmuted. So Laura Verana, take it away.
Laura Verana is assistant professor of African American literature at the University of South Alabama. So Laura, welcome. So glad we could do this and have you here.
Yes, thank you so much, Laura Hinton, and to everyone else organizing. Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for being here. And yes, at least the virtual Zoom space has allowed me to participate in an event that I'm going to be able to travel to New York for originally. So I'm grateful for that outcome of world craziness. Thank you to Alden and everyone else for situating my very brief remarks about Lorenzo Thomas so beautifully, because what I wanted to speak about for just a couple of minutes and then read another early poem by Lorenzo Thomas was the way editing his collected poems proved to be this fantastic educational process in figuring out a lot of the misrepresentations of Black literary and poetic histories that have already been alluded to by David Grundy and Alden and Lori and everyone so eloquently. As Alden's this project lived with us a very long time, are wont to do, and so it was birthed when I was still a graduate student, which meant that in-depth encounter with Lorenzo's work over a number of years of the process really helped shape a lot of the ways I was think about connections between Black pasts, the middle kind of the 20th century, and the very contemporary 21st century poetics that I mostly research and work on now. So I think, like Lorenzo Thomas and these other Umbra poets, are so key for situating, breaking some of the barriers between so-called literary movements that others have been speaking about. We look closely at these
Have we lost Laura?
Yeah, Laura, you've
Laura
frozen in
froze.
place. Laura, can you hear us?
Oh no.
Let's see if we can.
Maybe we can come back to her because she has about 5 or 6 minutes left still.
Okay. All right. So, well, let's. Yeah. So, should we come back?
Yeah, we should. I don't know.
I guess this is our time for questions and general remarks. So, by the audience. So we can come back to Laura.
Okay, yeah, if Laura's screen comes back up, let's go to her then, okay?
Okay, let's do that. So Laura, Vrana, if you can hear us, we're going to come back. If people have questions or they want to make comments, we entertain those now, and it's helpful if you use the little device to put up your hand, or you can put a thumb or something up from your, if you don't see the hand up, you can use the reactions down at the lower right part of the screen. So
you're unmuted.
Well, what do
You're unmuted.
why?
We can hear you.
Oh.
Okay, so who has a question or a comment about what you've just heard? I'm sort of bowled over. I am late to this poetry, and I'm absolutely so completely overwhelmed by the power of all of this poetry. And this is my education tonight, everybody. Thank you for coming to my education. So I would love to hear from some of you about what you're hearing. If you have some comments, anybody have a hand they want to raise, or give me a little thumbs up and we call on you.
Barrett, did you have your hand up, sir? Oh, I'm trying to unmute you.
Let's see. Okay, I'm unmuted. Am I being heard?
You're good, yeah.
Okay, so this is just a kind of a question that probably has a lot of places to go. I want to know about surrealism.
I'm suddenly not hearing anything anywhere. Are people talking?
Well, I'm hearing me. Is anybody else?
I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're good.
All right. I'm really interested in the transmission of surrealism in the 50s and 60s and how it got to Umbra. And I want to know where it came from, what exactly was meant by, what surrealism, where did it come, what specifically? And if it was like the green ray, something coming from very far that meant something incredible and strange, then I'd like to know that too.
Wasn't this the Caribbean? I'll let Alden answer that, but I think that we're talking about a very powerful vector of surrealism coming through the Caribbean that's often...
Exactly. The short answer is negritude, okay? Now, Brent Edwards has written about this at great length, but the short version is, we have a professor of French from Howard University who is in the Nardal sisters' living room as all this is happening. And we have Langston Hughes making these travels and doing these translations. That professor from the French Department of Howard is one of the first people to translate negritude poetry in English. He takes it back to Howard. This stuff begins circulating before it's ever published in English. So by the time we get to the post-World War II era, this is a widespread influence already among younger African American poets. And then you add to that the Garcia Lorca spice, I guess.
Well, Allen Ginsberg had talked about Bob Kaufman. He would bring this French surrealist to Kaufman because he considered him to be one of the rare true surrealists, especially in America. So Bob Kaufman and Allen Ginsberg. He has that in the anthology I did that's available. He talks about it at length.
Yes, highly recommended. I bought that anthology hot off the press during those events celebrating Kaufman's work and the film that was made, and David was on the panel, and Alden was in the movie, and Maria Damon, who I think is here, was on the panel and in the movie. And I just fell in love with this guy that I didn't know about. And he was a San Francisco beat. So you have these interesting threads and crisscrosses. But what's amazing to me, I have to echo David Grundy, that this material we're talking about is so difficult to come by. It is not, it is just now being published by Wesleyan and by all of you. Thank you for doing that. But otherwise, we don't find a lot of it on the internet, which is astounding. Maybe David wants to comment a little further. This powerful body, multiple bodies of work, so difficult to come by. As I think David Grundy mentioned sorry, we got an echo in my house now. My husband got online with the show. So I'm hearing myself in the background. David, talk a little bit about the Brenda Walcott pieces that we got from you. So very difficult to read her work.
Why is it difficult?
Because the work is not out there. It's not circulating in the publishing industry.
She started late.
She started late.
Yes.
But David, did you want to comment on just the availability? I mean, of all the people here, I think David, scholarly wise, you have plunged the depths of what's out there and available in your recent book, Black Arts Machine. And it's quite an accomplishment because the material is so difficult to find. So David, I think
more so in the bibliography.
Umbra didn't give a shit. In other words, we didn't care because we just developed that poet. That was the belief.
We give a shit about you, and we want to read your work.
Well, you shall. Look, there's these 2 books that are just done from Britain. Thank goodness. There's a whole English-speaking world out there. Do these things get to Australia? I'm here with Maggie Wrigley from Australia. Do they get those books?
No, I don't think so. But, David, did you want to comment on the availability of materials? David Grundy?
Well, yeah. I mean, Alden was talking about all the books we need, which that list could be extended kind of almost indefinitely. I don't really know where to start. There's a lot of material. Some of it's in.
Well, give up the mic then. Shit.
How did you do this research, David?
Libraries, partly. A lot of stuff in the Schomburg Center. Secondhand. Some of the stuff you can get secondhand. Some of it, you can't. So just the process of looking through libraries, looking through stuff, and then over a period of time, you build up the material.
I see a comment here from Emil Alcalay. Emil?
Yes. Hi.
Thank you for coming.
Hi. Thank you, Laura, for putting this together. This is amazing. It's great to see everybody. And I just want to say, in terms of, I got a sneak preview of David's bibliography, and it's absolutely staggering. It is absolutely staggering. There is an enormous amount of material. And as Alden said, much work to be done. But it's really important to just have that in one place so that people can start looking at it and familiarize themselves with things that are hard to find, very hard to find and very hard to piece together. So I just want to commend David for that work, and just terrific to have this gathering and see what's being done. So thanks, Laura.
And I think that you and Tonya had the event at the grad school that David Henderson was involved in. So unfortunately,
yes, we did. We did lots of work.
We're cousin colleagues, but we don't speak. I'm up in the barrio in Harlem, and that horrible spaceship building that David was remarking. That's my life for 30 years, David. And they built the North Academic Complex, or the NAC, to silence people. They made it so people couldn't sit together, so they didn't have community space.
Wow.
And later they built benches and they did some tables, but it's quite a, so they say it was built by a prison architect.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and it's because of you guys in the 60s, you know, so that they came
Well,
along and they said, we're going to get rid of those guys. So
why not have
it's a struggle. The struggle is alive and well.
they need a department, but the woman who put the thing on at CUNY at the Grad Center,
Even
Sweeney,
Yeah.
Sweeney, who was wonderful, and Amiel's colleague, they were great, and the staff there at the Center for Humanities was really wonderful. The whole thing.
Yeah, the Center for Humanities is a very blessed space, and grateful to Amiel also for the Lost and Found series, which has been so important in bringing materials that have been lost and found back into the scholarly realm, and so that we can read it and we can re-experience some of those materials. But yeah, I mean, we should right now organize who's going to do what collections and what books. So anybody want to volunteer? Okay, everybody put your hands up. Alan Golding, I see you. Susan Schultz, I see you.
All right, we're going to pass around a sign-up sheet. While we do that, it looks like Laura has made it back in from
okay. So, Laura, are you back in? You want to say you want to read your
Yes.
Oh
Yes.
my God, look at her.
So sorry about that. We haven't had internet issues in months, and of course it chooses now. So I will just do reading the one Lorenzo Thomas poem that I think is helpful to have in our ears. I don't want to take too much time from this discussion here. I'll read, especially after the photo of Thomas at that Paul Laurence Dunbar event. Another early Thomas poem that's called Paul Laurence Dunbar views the sword of Toussaint Louverture, Chicago Exposition, 1883, written for Etheridge Knight. So that title right there gets us this incredible bridging of Black literary and cultural histories from the Haitian Revolution to Dunbar to the Chicago Exposition in 1893, Etheridge Knight, in terms of his poetic contemporaries. 400 years of exploitation edged the blade, and Black Toussaint exposed the rent in white imperial veils as the tropic sky burned dark thunder and the lightning of the saints. Orisha Ogun unchained the blade before his eyes, cut and cleared imperialism of Versailles, and flicked the latch for Legba, where spirits wandered on the razor edge King's Highway. In the jails, through the chains, spirits loosed in the world and slaves set, and young Paul's tongue floating in his mouth struck blind the hatred in our common speech. Yes, it will come, St. Paul will come as once to you, so young and gaping before the opening of a better world.
Oh, powerful. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you, Laura Vrana, and thank you, Alden Lynn Nielsen, for your presentations. And I think what we'll do is just continue with the readings, and we'll integrate some more discussion. So if people just want to ask questions or comments as we move, then we'll address them. We'll just keep this fluid and open. So Tyrone Williams, Dudrick or Janelle, can we get Tyrone Williams highlighted there? Find him. Tyrone?
Yep, I'm here.
You're there. But we
Hi,
got
Tyrone.
the Zoom
Be,
screen.
unmuted if you want to go ahead.
Okay, so can you, here he is. Okay, so Tyrone agreed to read something very difficult, a Norman Pritchard piece. I'll let him introduce you, but he wants to just go by Tyrone. He's I believe in Cincinnati, correct? At Xavier. How do you say your university? I want to say Xavier because I'm from the Southwest, but it's Xavier University, and he is a writer of many books of poetry and a poet scholar. So
this is As We Lay.
As We Lay.
Weary was wind coming on a stream in hidden mists, the amber adornment of fall's birth, here near edge, a rippling soundless leaves and eddy eyes with trickling forest eyes and widening youthful rippling scenic creekless. In this boundless vastly hours wait and gateless isn't fleshly smelling muchly as a golden. On the cruddish underbrush of where no one walked were unwindish rustlings, musting thoughts of ill-timed harvests. And as we lay, and as we lay, as we lay, and as we lay, above a bird watching we knew not what caused his course, of course, we lay, in the rippling, soundless, boundless, vastly, of a furthering duty leaving we lay, wanting naughtless. And then it seemed as from the air, he left the bird who watched what would be called a dream.
Thank you. This long lost book, The Matrix by Norman H. Pritchard, is bootlegged by the eclipse.org people. So you'll find it on the internet if you go to Eclipse. And actually Eclipse does have a few of the books. And so until they can get republished and available to all of us, it's a place where you can find some of the poetry. Thank you so much, Tyrone. And we could go back to David Henderson. David, would you like to read one or two of your poems now?
Yes, you said you wanted a early one, and then I have a later one about the kids. It's only one page, and this one in triple space. This one is called Bopping. And you know, when I was a teenager, there was a way of walking in the ghetto, in the hood, and everyone had their own style of bopping, and it had rhythm to it, and it was a very beautiful thing. You can see it in some of the old films, but people bop, but they do more walk like ninjas today than they did more Afro thing. This bopping. A man and I bop to general agreement, like the toast to the boys upstate, every bottle of Paradise or Thunderbird wine. Down cats, we bop to give cause to the causes that died before they got to us. I remember the arm-pumping cap-crown blades of my boyhood, their elemental gait talking deep beneath my eyes, the list at waist and trunk, whip of an arm, and abrupt, then long wing-tipped stride of days when we had to show ourselves love and difficult pretensions, as if speaking words of self-love was too remote a performance when, before the fact, we understood all too well the action of the thrust. We maneuvered to turn that way in dawns or dusk of the eternal wars among ourselves, our gangs, the 7 Crowns, chaplains, sportsmen, Egyptian knights, Boston baldies, young sinners, enchanters, Dushan lords, because talking after all is too little of glamour to the hungry, the ugly, the mean. We bop when about to fight, and we bop when happy, all in our own slight variances known to the members of the road and known to the similar bops of the roaming hordes. From Avenue D to Red Hook, through Marcy Projects, then Crown Heights, Prospect Avenue in the Bronx and also in Brooklyn, the 5th Avenue Armory on 141st in the Harlem River, Bronx River Housing, 43, 55, 99 Center, Boston Road, from winters to graduation, from street duels until wedlock, or the cops shot us down, bopping. That was a very popular poem of mine, you know. And so this last one I'll read is a poem that they had up at a place called Hall, which is on First Street in the Bowery, and they're doing a museum. They're doing do some archiving, but at this time they have a gallery and they do shows, and they have this thing called a telephone thing that you can dial up and get these points, get a bunch of points from different poets. So this one is called Child at the Border of Hope, Not. A child stands alone at the border of hope, not. Of duration and dimension, most children would know not what, as fable or cartoon, common depictions common to dimensions we know not. Theories of science that loom beyond basic tenets of the human heart. A child is regaled and sung praises to, given favors for being, certainly for present times of existence. The small creatures, small as the little people of magic lore, all could qualify as dream creatures from the next world, so disrespected by the lords of guns and bombs, poison rays and gases. Who would not have thou children enclosed in bare fields of wire fences from ground to wire ceilings, sealed against acrobats or semi-super or superheroes? Little people, imprisoned only because of the proximity to promised lands. And that's the end. So
thank you.
So thank you. Thank you very much. This is great.
Did we ever get Lennox Raphael back?
Lennox?
I'm working on it. We're working on it.
Still working on it?
Oh, look at her. Look at her. Look at, she looks great.
And it turns out M. Rose was one of my students and knows David, so she's, I mean, we knew each other back, what, about 3 years ago, Emily, back in the class time, and yeah, and she also danced at the feminist superhero event at the Center for Humanities for Jane Cortez, Adrian Rich, and the feminist superheroes. So we've danced in and out together, and I'm really glad you're here. Thank you for helping. So we have Jean-Philippe Marceau, but I don't know, is he here, Alden, to read poems by, he wanted to read some poems by Tom Dent. Do we see him? I'm not seeing him in Alden. Yeah, I don't know what happened exactly. Okay, so we'll, hopefully he'll show up. People are maybe having internet issues. Dudrick, would you like to read the Ishmael Reed poem that you chose for us?
Thank you.
And I just want to say Dudrick Bevins is a just about former student of mine. He's taken, what, 2 classes from me, Dudrick?
That's all they're letting me take. They said that's all I could have.
Yeah, well, but he's a wonderful multimedia poet in our MFA program. He's also, I think, a stellar teacher of a charter school in New York in Harlem, and they gave him lessons on Zoom, and he's a real Zoom guy. He knows how to do Zoom, and he also knows how to do nice lights in his quarantine apartment there.
Well, you know, it's Friday night. I wanted to feel like it was a little disco-y. Yeah, so I'm going to read Ishmael Reed's I Am a Cowboy in the Boat of Ra. It opens with this quote. The devil must be forced to reveal any such physical evils, potions, charms, fetishes, etc., still outside the body, and these must be burned. From Rituale Romanum, published 1947, endorsed by the Coat of Arms, an introductory letter from Francis Cardinal Spellman. I am a cowboy in the boat of Ra. Sidewinders in the saloons of fools bit of my forehead like, oh, the untrustworthiness of Egyptologists who do not know their trips. Who was that dog-faced man, they asked, the day I rode from town? Schoolmarms with halitosis cannot see that Nefertiti fake chipped on this run by slick Germans, the hawk behind Sonny Rollins' head, or the ritual beard of his axe, a longhorn winding its bells through the field of reeds. I am a cowboy in the boat of Ra. I bedded down with Isis, lady of the boogaloo, dove deep down in her horny, stuck-up wells far ago, in darling midday getaway. Start grabbing the blue, I said, from the top of my double crown. I am a cowboy in the boat of Ra. Ezard Charles in the Chisholm Trail took up the bass, but they blew off my thumb. Alchemist in ringmanship, but a sucker for the right cross. I am a cowboy in the boat of Ra. Vamoosed from the temple, I bide my time. The price of the wanted poster was a going up. Outlaw alias copped my stance, and moody greenhorns were making me dance while my mouth shooting iron got its chambers jammed. I am a cowboy in the boat of Ra. Boning up in the Old West, I bide my time. You should see me picking off these tin can whippersnappers. I write the Motown long plays for the comeback of Osiris. Make them up when stars stare at sleeping steer out here near the campfire. Women arrive on the backs of goats and throw themselves on my buoy. I am a cowboy in the boat of Ra. Lord of the Lash, Lou Garou Kid, half-breed son of Pisces and Aquarius, I hold the souls of men in my pot. I do the dirty boogie with scorpions. I make the bulls keep still, and I was the first swinger to grape the taste. I am a cowboy in his boat. Pope John of Tara. Come here a minute, will ya? Be a good girl and bring me my buffalo horn of black powder. Bring me my headdress of black feathers. Bring me my bones of juju snakes. Go get my eyelids of red paint. Hand me my shadow. I'm going into town after set. I am a cowboy in the boat of Ra. Look out, Set. Here I come, Set. To go get Set. The sunset Set. To unset Set. To set down Set. Usurper of the royal couch. Imposter radio of Moses Bush. Party pooper, oh hater of dance. Vampire outlaw of the Milky Way. Thank you.
Bravo. That was great. Wonderful poem. Thank you. I'm going to read a little bit from some recollections. These are in prose, and they've been published by many Umbra writers in different locations, but there were about 3 of them in the African American Review in winter of '93, volume 27, if anyone wants to look it up. So 1993, and this is from Tom Dent. The early 60s was a special impassioned period in history. I don't believe that it will be repeated. It was a time when we, like many other aspiring Black artists, immigrated from various sections of the country to New York, which was considered a mecca, and then to the Lower East Side, which had cheap rents and was an amazingly varied and vibrant community. It was there that our lives intersected in the quest to grow as artists. For us, from different backgrounds and histories, it was a time of intense companionship and sharing, which provided us with a sense of we-ness that tempered the I-ness prevalent in so much of American literature and art. Certainly this was true in my case, a Southern boy fleeing the restrictions of my society. I wondered how I would have arrived at whatever sense of balance I now possess had we not created Umbra and shared the Lower East Side experience. I think that experience taught us an appreciation for the diversity of voices within our we-ness as a way of absorbing and interpreting the times, which were deeply imbued with a struggle for diasporan and anti-colonial political liberation and the emerging sense of Black cultural identity. Each of us was challenged, I believe, to discover his or her own way of rendering and transforming those dominant ideas through our work, according to our own personal visions. Tom Dent. So let us hear from Janelle Poe. Janelle, where are you?
Hi.
Hi, where are you? On the, you know, these screens, I can't find you.
If it's on speaker view, I think I should be popping up soon.
There
Although
you
I
are.
can't see myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Janelle Poe, along with Dedrick Bevins, has been helping organize the interruptions on Zoom. And I should put out a little word there. I just texted two of the audience participants today. This is Susan Schultz and Kathy Lou Schultz. They are going to do a reading in a couple of weeks, I believe, under Interruptions, which will be called Schultz and Schultz. So I proposed Thursday, May 28th, but I'll have to get back with you on that. But Janelle has been running Interruptions too, which is an open mic coupled with featured student poets, and they've been wonderful along with our other poets. And so I encourage everyone to come to the next one. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back probably in May and hopefully continue through June, and we'll just see during this period of community at a distance. Janelle is also a beginning PhD student at the Graduate Center. And Emil, you don't know what's coming at you, Emil. So I'm very proud of her because she was one of my most wonderful students, and it's been 2 or 3 years now, but and she's continuing her career into a doctoral program in African American Studies and American literature. So very excited. She's also a poet, and she has published already a chapbook called Black and White Studies with Cheryl Oppenheim, who I believe did the visual art. And like Dedrick, she's one of my multimedia stars, and she just does a lot. So Janelle, I asked if she would read a little Brenda Walcott, knowing from David Henderson that Brenda's career as a poet was later, and that her connection with Umbra was very tight, but she was apparently at that time known as a dancer. And later on, she started doing some pretty powerful writing, and we want to hear from some of the women associated with Umbra. So I'll turn it over to Janelle to read.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Laura, and for enabling me to be a part of this and to pay tribute to these powerful and really important artists. And as a professor, I feel like all I'm doing is telling my students how important it is to celebrate these voices that have been misrepresented or neglected, and it's up to us to keep the archives growing and alive. And it's an honor for me to share Brenda's words, Miss Walcott's words, and to know that she's a Harlemite here, and that even in this moment, we're still connected, and maybe more than we ever have been, with a lot of potential for great work to continue coming out of this moment and to create change. So I'm going to read 2 of her poems. The first one is, oh gosh, gotta find it. Okay. Okay, so the first one was sent to me, thank you, by Lori Shire and David Grundy. So this is called Slave of a Slave. Slave of a slave. It's a bitch to be the slave of a slave. It's really an impossible gig. Big Massa, he beat Big Slave. Kick him. Make Big Slave feel harassed. Big Slave come home angry and kick me in my ass. It's a bitch to be the slave of a slave. Big Slave go to tell Massa, get off my back. Massa trick him and lie to him and treat him like dirt. Big Slave come home and say, I'm cutting and snipping at his manhood, cause that where he hurts. It is sure a bitch being the slave of a slave. Sometime Big Slave let me come a little near. He give me a little rest from my hell. He let me caress his glistening field slave body and to smell his sweet skin with its field slave smell. And I think, why, Big Slave is gonna take my hand. We gonna fight Massa together. We gonna take our land. But morning come, and Big Slave say, remember your place. Back in the kitchen, back on your face. It's a fucking bitch to be a slave of a slave. Sometime I think I should turn on Big Slave. I should just holler and scream. But Big Massa, he loved to see that. To see our shit in the stream. He scoops it up and the powerful smell makes him heady. He pushes it in our face and says, see, you ain't ready. It's frustrating to be the slave of a slave. There ain't nothing free but Massa and me. That's what I've heard Big Slave say. Now, if that ain't a bitch, I don't know what it be. 'Cause Big Massa, I hate him from the bottom of my womb. He's just crazy mean and rotten to the core. But poor Big Slave, he just can't help it anymore. He been hit on the head too many times by Massa. He just looking for an answer. He sometimes does what he see Massa do. It's a sad bitch being the slave of a slave. Okay, and this second one, I believe, is from 2007 from an anthology called Poets Against the Killing Fields. And I believe that, I know Tony Medina is a part of this collective, and I believe Ishmael Reed might have also been it, and I think Askia Touré, several poets. It was also a multicultural group. And this book came out, like I said, I think in 2007. So this is called For Roberto La Santa, 911 or 9/11. Yo, Roberto, your disability payments come yet? You were one of the finest New Yorkers to walk into my classroom. Charisma flying, other students caught fire from you. They loved this young teacher, this young girl teacher, because you loved me. Look at you now. 1 or 2 breakdowns, 4 arteries blocked, 10 teeth ground away, 100 documents flying around confused VA, Vietnam specialist bureaucrats' offices. You told me that before 2/3 of your Agent Orange soaked, all Puerto Rican battalion gave up their lives for this country, you guys would say to each other, look how we got tricked. Mira como nos hicieron una mala jugada. You were a lover of people, tricked into thinking you'd earn a living if you could hate just enough to kill unborn babies. You couldn't do it. 30 years later, that fine, fine body is breaking down. The fire of the non-jungles burns in your veins. Screams come from your toothless mouth. Mira como nos hicieron mala jugada. Look how we got tricked. Hideous old men are calling children to war again. Wives, mothers are crying again. Creating a global river of suffering. Juan is limping home again, again. Leroy is coming home in a box again, again. My dear Roberto, when are the people of this country going to cry out as you brave young Ricans did? Mira como nos hicieron una mala jugada. Look how we got tricked. And this poem ends with a note that says, Roberto died of a massive heart attack in a VA hospital on February 21st, 2005.
Thank you for those powerful reading of powerful poems by Brenda Walcott.
Thank you so much, Janelle. I always love to hear you read. I just wanted to let everyone know 2 things. One, we do have Jean-Philippe here with us. He is in the room. So I can unmute him momentarily. And if anyone has any questions, we do want this to be kind of discussion-based. Feel free to use the raise hand feature. If you can't access that for any reason, I've heard some messages that people can't access it. That's okay. You can send a chat to any of the hosts that you need to be unmuted, and one of the 3 or 4 of us will make sure you get to be heard.
Okay, and Dudrick, maybe you can keep an eye on those chats because I have trouble doing that and doing this at the same time.
Yeah, you can chat me, that's fine.
So yeah, so we want to hear from Jean-Philippe Marceau. I'm really glad that he made it. I just wanted to read a little bit from the, again, from the Remembrances of Umbra by Umbra writers. Another woman writer who was involved in Umbra, but kind of felt herself to be a little more marginalized, was the African writer who immigrated to New York, Rashidah Ismaili. And she wrote a book that was published, I think, 2015, Autobiography of the Lower East Side, a novel in short stories by Rashidah Ismaili, but it is very autobiographical, but she's displaced the stories onto into a fictive voice, and so it'd be kind of interesting to figure out who she's writing about. And I recommend it, but I found this piece in the same issue of that African American Review from 1993, which is clearly a more direct and autobiographical version of what she would later turn into a novel. And I can't help but think that the novel version was a way of sort of protecting her voice from the critique that she had of Umbra and the role of women in Umbra. So let me just read a little bit from it. 1993, called Slightly Autobiographical, the 1960s on the Lower East Side. The rich ethnic mixture on the Lower East Side was built up by waves of immigrants from war-torn Europe who found themselves in limited confines of 5-story tenements, walk-ups with hall toilets, bathtubs in the kitchen. Densely populated streets offered little space for their children or for merchants. A functional coexistence did, however, develop. Bakers were indoors all year round, rag collectors traveled, the vendors and brave pedestrians shared the sidewalks. Although these immigrants constituted the class of marginal socioeconomic status, they were for the most part in control of their profits. Those Africans who were living nearby were the buyers. Even in this non-affluent area, class alignment with color was in full practice. But in the 60s, there was war and chaos and simultaneously hope. Here, in cramped apartments and cold water studios, the essence of life and the role of art and artists were discussed, fought over by Black and white artists with an air of seriousness. Poets read their work in bars, cafes, parks, and studios. They carried heavy book bags of manuscripts. Dog-eared books lined their shelves. Perhaps encouraged by the questioning and revolt, believing change for the better was imminent, African-American artists came together on the Lower East Side to begin the job of articulating the stories of their people. On Friday nights, Tom Dent would hold meetings of Umbra at his tiny apartment. There would always be a gallon of communal wine, ashtrays filled with cigarettes, and loud voices demanding to be heard over others. After a few hours of discussion of the latest poems and the contents of so-and-so's novel, the girlfriends would start to arrive. I had to leave early because of my son, and I remember having the feeling of being left out. For me, this was a painful time. I was separating from my husband for the first time, alone with a small boy, trying to complete graduate school and write. I felt very estranged at times from my Ebon scribes and painters. They made it clear they were not interested in me because I was Black, African, and too ethnic, i.e., quote, not beautiful, unquote. Besides, I did not do drugs or drink. In fact, cigarette smoke made my eyes tear and my throat choke. To add fat to the fire, I had strong opinions and was extremely independent. These were the 60s, and Black men were coming into their own. Black women had to understand their manly needs, walk 10 paces behind, submit to male authority. We were not to question a man's work, even if it were incorrect. We were to dress African, quote unquote, assume the persona of, quote, the motherland, and raise little revolutionaries. Most of all, we were to remain unconditionally loyal to the Black man and never under any circumstance be seen in intimate association with a white man. I highly recommend her autobiography of the Lower East Side, which takes that into third person distance, and just to learn about her life and what life was like among the artists in there, and what some of the sexual politic issues were as well. So turning this over to Jean-Philippe to read some from Tom Dent's poetry.
Can you hear me?
Hi there.
Hi.
You made it.
I was here all along. I was just under my wife's name. Sorry about that.
That happened. Okay.
Tried to.
So Jean-Philippe is in Quebec, and yeah, we're thrilled. He is also working on a book about Umbra, so that's exciting, and we look forward to hearing more about that work, Jean-Philippe. So he'll be reading from Tom Dent's A Message for Langston for Walter Washington and 10 Years After Umbra.
I'll just read the first two, just so maybe we have time for someone else to read.
Okay, perfect.
Speaking to what David was saying earlier at the very beginning, a message for Langston. Well, Langston, nothing much has changed. White folks gone to the moon, but we still walk down the ghetto looking for a nickel to shoot pool. We've got more poets now, talking about being black and proud and beautiful, but maybe it comes too easy. In your day, black and beautiful was harder to say. You should see the way the white folks giving us money wonder what simple would say. Your prediction about Baldwin came true. Trains passed him by last summer. Coltrane's gone and Willie Mays is getting old. Black life's still festering like an open sore. Nobody know how long before it's gonna explode. I hope that where you are, they have gin and tonic. If the deal goes down soon, you better save me some.
That's great.
For bluesman Walter Washington. We black blues singers, we blacken the chords with shots of blue. We black blues singers, we are you pleading, I gave you all my love, please don't abuse it. We are you crying, I tried my best, but it wasn't worth it. We are you wishing, the rain smell would drive away the sweaty, mad dreams of last night. We are you watching the half-empty, half-caught days of your life pass before your face. We are you listening to the field slide of my voice, the wolf wail of my guitar. Open up the strained face. You knew it all the time. Stop time, your moments. We are you coming off down the speed of all that. Back home where life lay open ready. New Orleans is an easy town to dance the blues in. Everybody, tune your mind. Guitar. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I think Kathy Schultz has a question for David Henderson.
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yay. I can't see David Henderson's face, though.
Don't you see my shiny head?
There you are. I was interested in, you had mentioned how Baraka came to y'all and asked you to raise money for Bart's and how you were willing to do that. But there was a difference in ideology with the Umbra poets being more committed to a kind of multicultural group as opposed to a nationalist ideology. And I wondered if you could say more about that.
Well, there were different sides, but we had different, we had different people with different points of view, but we all hung together. But there was a group of guys who spun off, who got a little bit, worked up, and there was a little scuffle that we had, and then they, took something but returned it the next day and apologized. But of those people, one of them was Charles Patterson, who I knew as a teenager also. He went up to Harlem with Amiri. He was an interesting guy. Now he was a real street gangster type, a hustler type, and he had his brother who had a little mental problem with him, and another guy who I could never figure out, and his name is kind of escaping me at the moment, but they for some reason this guy Charles Patterson, really had a beef. I mean, he was angry, but he wrote well. And Amiri, I think, never met someone like him, who was, you know, both violent and artistic. And I think he was a little fascinated by him. But I'm only guessing about what the situation was. But what happened was they had a dispute, those guys, with Larry Neal, who Amiri edited Black Fire, and they actually shot Larry in the leg.
Oh my God.
And he went to the hospital. I don't think he ever told the police who shot him, but he was shot with a large caliber weapon, and he must have had a long time to heal. But that's when Amiri left and went to Newark, where I think, and maybe others, that he should have gone in the first place, because that was his hometown. I'm from Harlem. I didn't think that he would do well up there, but he did do well in Harlem. And he has in his autobiography, he has a thing about having lunch with this gangster. Oh my God! But who was, as it turns out, the uncle of Joe Johnson. That was a secret. But Joe died. Joe, bless his soul, he died recently, and just so he didn't want that mentioned, I think, while he was alive. But but that's kind of those guys did not continue with Amiri. He went to Newark and then built his movement that he was able to go across the country and have meetings and rallies with Jesse Jackson and the mayors of some Midwestern towns, black mayors, and really make a political statement, which I don't think he was ever satisfied with. And that's something I mean to go back to and read again to see what was on his mind. Just as when Obama became president, he kind of got quiet and he wouldn't really comment on it. And I was also curious about that. So he's a fascinating figure who could have been very famous. All he had to do was stay in the village and write movies like The Dutchman, and and write plays, and he had it made. But he took off uptown and realized, I think, a larger dream, because his son, of course, is the mayor of Newark, and he's a wonderful fellow, So it's a happy ending to his being fascinated with strange people from other walks of life, because he came up middle class. His father was in the post office, and Charmy was had a difficult childhood, but was very brave and had levels of calm that I never could figure out. But he was very brave, and there's one thing he did that I still marvel over. He had a pair of dice that were fake, but you had to learn how to palm them correctly, and he was doing that and studying it and practicing. I said, man, you're gonna get hurt, man, if they catch you. But I saw him shoot crap with these guys and he did it perfectly. And this was dangerous, what he was doing. So he was an interesting guy. So I could understand Amiri's curiosity.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, you're welcome.
And I have a question too. As some of you know, I've published on Jane Cortez, and I know that during this period, during your Umbra period, Jane was in Los Angeles doing some similar work that Amiri Baraka would do with Black theater. And then she would come to New York in the 1970s, early 70s, I think. But did she have any kind of status or I mean, I think that you knew her, but I guess she came on the scene a bit later to be part of anything in Umbra. But she was doing a lot of some of this work with the Watts Repertory Theater in South Central Los Angeles, and unfortunately there are no records. There's no archives there were no videos from that period. But I always thought that she also got underrated, that the Black Harlem Theater got all the credit, and that the Black arts movement, that a lot of the Black community centered around Watts and South Central Los Angeles were were creating did not get as much attention and acclaim. But anyway, tell us about your relationship with Jane Cortez, or how did she come in and out?
Well, we were friends, and she was a very gracious woman. And of course, you know,
Yeah.
after she died, they made a shrine to her in Africa. They gave her land, and
Wow.
they made a shrine. But you know, she had been married to Ornette Coleman in L.A. and came to New York. I guess that had a big impact on her because Ornette became very, very large. But I think she did well with her band. You know, Donato, her son, with Ornette, played drums.
Yeah.
And she had some excellent musicians playing with her. And I think her records did very well. And she was lionized, you know, by a lot of people. She had a following and did well for herself, I think, you know, with her music, you know.
But how was she integrated into the Lower East Side community? Any relationships there? Or
well, she was married to Ornette, and then she was married to that artist,
Mel
Gibson, who
yeah.
He was a very interesting guy, and you know, he made all these iron things, and I said, you know, I'd like to see him lock himself up in those things, you know, and but that was it was a joke, you know, but he was very talented and did very well also. So they, you know, and they were good, you know, they seemed to be, you know, they liked each other, you know, they got along well, and he was a good stepfather to Donato. And I think that they just kept it going, and that was the main thing.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I guess, I mean, she was living in the West Village and doing a lot with NYU. And I don't know if you had any connection with NYU or those conferences that she did at NYU.
She sent me she invited me to the last one, but I missed it. I was not able to get to it. And she had a good relationship with NYU.
Yes,
but of course, Mantia Diawara was the head of that program, and you know, and she had this thing with Africa, and she went over there, and this stuff. I've never got the details on her trips to Africa, but she had a big impression on them, and she had a lot of poise, you know, and you know, and I kind of, she had a lot of respect from everyone, and but she was not she didn't play pranks on each other either, or was a jokester. She was serious but very kind and very nice.
Yeah, she was a good person and a wonderful poet. Lori, quite a long time ago, I think I just saw this, Lori Ramey, did you want to have a question or a comment?
Nick Strom has also been waiting, so I just want to get his name out there.
Okay, Lori Shire, are you there?
How come she's so quiet?
Yeah, what happened?
More about Calvin.
Am I unmuted now?
You're muted.
Oh, all right. Just big love to everybody. Hello, David. I'm enjoying every word. I wanted to say that we're all working really valiantly. Poor Lennox Raphael is hanging on. He is trying so hard. It looks like he is sending me a message now. We're trying to figure out how he could potentially speak through my computer and I can hold it up to the Zoom. I think that's the best we can work out. But he's hoping there will be a follow-up. He said he could see everybody briefly, and there was such a good vibe. So I wanted to inject his presence to whatever extent I can.
Oh, great! Thank you.
It's such a shame we can't get the tech to work.
We're not giving up, but we're sort of running out of time.
Yeah, we're going over time a little bit, but we can continue the discussion and for a little bit if other people have. I guess Dudrick, you said who's next?
Nick, and then Alden.
Okay, thank you.
And then I did have two quick things I want to say, but I'll wait.
Okay.
Hi everybody. I'm here listening from Atlanta, and thank everyone for their time and work putting this together. It's really great. David Henderson, you were just describing what Baraka was doing over in Newark after Bart's shut down, and I've been really interested lately in all of the Jihad Productions material coming out of Newark in the 70s, and just how little scholarship there is on that. And I wondered what like your reception of the Jihad Productions material was like in the 70s, or how poets in New York City were reading the Jihad Productions material when it was coming out?
The plays with the Marxist themes and those ones you're talking about? Because
Yeah,
I
like
didn't see a
the
lot of them.
That's later. That's later.
House.
That's later.
Yeah.
I saw a slave ship at the Negro Ensemble in Manhattan, and it was a beautiful. Archie Shepp did the music, and I saw the one about the boys in the bathroom. What is it? The
toilet.
The toilet.
the toilet, right? You know, and Dutchman, of course. But I didn't see a lot of the other ones, and I think that they had some of them had economic themes, as I heard, but I didn't see them. So, and I should have, but you know, Newark it's about an hour ride from New York. So, but he was great over there. My father was living over there for a while, and they met. You know, and he was very gracious. You know, people thought he was this angry radical, but he was the same guy, the same nice guy. Even though I think he got involved with Ron Karanga, and that was a shame. But he recuperated. He was great, though. He was a great, genial person. Surprisingly so, I thought.
I might add. Yeah, go ahead, David.
I just never saw many of those jihad things in Newark, but I did go to some of the club he had in the basement of his home, where he had a lot of good music playing, live music.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I was going to say, if you're interested in this topic, Baraka papers Howard University. Although I don't know how much longer those papers will still be at Howard University.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you say that?
It's also a large collection at Columbia, which overlaps the collection at Howard, and also has from Howard some jihad information. The point I was going to make on my own, responding to what Laura was saying about the Los Angeles situation, California is one of the subjects that has not been sufficiently studied yet. We've seen a lot of work on Chicago just recently, but there is a fair amount of scholarship being done, particularly around San Francisco State and the founding of Black Studies there, when Sonia Sanchez, Amiri Baraka, and Sun Ra were all there in the Bay Area at the same time. But also in the LA area, you know, there's a fair amount of work being done on the Watts Writers Workshop, but that's almost all there is. So I want to tell everybody about this one book.
Oh, I love that book.
The Dark Tree by Stephen, I don't know how to pronounce it, Iswardi, Jazz in the Community Arts in Los Angeles, which is picking up, it's centered on Horace Tapscott and the Oregon Pan-African Orchestra. And it's a great starting place to start exploring what was going on in LA that time. You know, what we really need all of this kind of work about the regional Black arts. We've got a little bit in the South, a little bit in Chicago, and that's about it so far. But you know, as I've joked over the years, the morning after they opened Bart's in New York, there were centers like that in every town in New York, in the United States, that had any Black people whatsoever. Little Schenectady, New York, where my draft board sent me, they had a center like that. We really need more and more exploration of that kind of stuff. But yeah, do look up The Dark Tree to learn about Horace Tapscott and the group around him.
That's a fabulous book, and I used it in my research on Jane Cortez. It really describes the unique situation of the Black community in Los Angeles.
Right.
And
it's nonfiction, right?
Nonfiction, yeah.
To the extent that anything about that time period is nonfiction.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, I'd like to check that out. You know, we brought Sun Ra to UC Berkeley, and he went down and played with Horace Tapscott. They had a battle of the bands down in LA. I wish I had seen that.
Oh, David, one thing that's in the papers at Howard University is the reference letter Amiri Baraka wrote to get Sun Ra the job at Berkeley.
No kidding. Oh, that's great. You know, when you got there, Bowker, who had been the chancellor at City College, and then became the chancellor at Berkeley, called Sun Ra a phantom, you know. And I think Sun Ra really liked that, being called a name by
campus pretty quickly. It was holding his classes somewhere else.
Oh, that's why. That's a good reason to call him a phantom. But they loved him in California, Sun Ra. He gave him a theater. They made that film out there. It was released.
Yeah.
And he had a part in there some kind of kooky part in the middle. It was plot based, but he bought the film, he unreleased the film, and the guy who paid for it let him do it. And they put the center section in a long musical thing, which was beautiful and perfect. So, you know, he had a good time. And you got a bunch of dancers and musicians from Berkeley also.
This is such a wild story. There was a porn film filming at the same time in the same place. And in the original filming, they included a little bit of that, and Sun Ra did not want that in there. The original version of Spaces the Place doesn't have that. The reissued DVD you could get has a couple of nude scenes in the hospital that Sun Ra did not like.
Oh, no, no wonder. I didn't know that. Oh, my gosh. Oh, gosh.
Laura, you had a question or some comments, Lori Schreier?
The conversation's just going in such interesting directions. Steve Suarty's done wonderful work, and he'd really appreciate knowing that it has impact. So, you know, drop him a line or something. And Beyond Baroque has actually started to do some very good archival work and presentations. I think Will Alexander's involvement has been very helpful in that regard. But they've really tried to do a lot to recuperate the whole breadth of Black LA's past. So good things happening.
Nice. That's a great place.
Santa Barbara next.
Oh my God.
Okay.
No, they burned down a bank in Santa Barbara back in the day.
The Bank of America. But then that became a university center, that building. Capitalism always reclaims everything.
Oh my gosh, that was funny. They burned the one down in Berkeley also. On you know, it's amazing.
Who else has a question or comment?
That Black Chan is one of the greatest books I've ever read.
Can you say that again?
Yeah. We don't have a mass market edition or something.
Okay, David.
Making it available.
It's online free as a PDF.
Out of here.
Yeah, if anybody needs it, they can email me. I'll give them the link.
Right on. That's good. Yeah, that's a beautiful book, man.
Another beautiful book is this one, Extraordinary Measure.
Oh my God, yes.
And he has a few words about David Henderson. He says, this is published, I think, 2000. All the young Black writers in New York shared a sense of cultural crisis that was to become the basis of the Black arts movement. They were basically concerned to effect the returning of a purely African sensibility and a style that would develop organically from this feeling and stance. They did not know exactly what to do. All were alienated, lacking a direct connection with African culture simply because they had grown up as Black Americans with fundamentally American tastes and sensibilities. Among the Umbra writers, there was a similar affinity for non-Western approaches and ideas. David Henderson's early catalogs of awesome depression in the white man's 20th century urban America are grimly illuminated by flashes of an Abyssinian metempsychosis. His figures, situated as they are in a completely recognizable urban present, turn angrily or sadly toward myth. Henderson's major concerns in these poems is a concept of atavism. His constant wonder is whether present behavior finds its basis in a reaction to the hideousness of the Black man's lot in white America, or whether it is determined by atavistic traits, vaguely remembered habits from the pre-slavery African past. He examines all action in this light, attempting to identify the sources of each individual presentation and response. Unlike Spellman, many of whose poems seem to take place in a timeless and unspecified contemplative space, all of Henderson's work is set in the real world with all its shabby complexity. I love that.
Oh, that's so nice. He was beautiful.
He's a beautiful writer, and his description of New York is just wonderful. It's so real.
When Lorenzo says that all of David's work is set in a real place, that includes the poem on Ornette Coleman's science fiction.
That's Ornette's poem. That was Ornette's poem. Right. Yes.
Yeah.
That was his poem.
Yeah, I was just excerpting here. And then he said he quotes the mayor of Harlem, in "They look this way and walk that way, as tribal as they can be under the law." What a great title, David. Anyways, it's beautiful. It's chapter 5 of this Extraordinary Measures, and another wonderful book week.
He quotes a Leroy Jones poem in there when he first got to Newark, and I looked it up, and the reference is wrong. So I can't find out what the name of that poem is, but it's really unique to Amiri because it's a kind of profane and strange. He's talking about the Italians and the political structure of Newark prior to the city finally taking it over. So his language is just surprising. And there's a footnote to it. He quotes about 10 or 12 lines from it. And whatever that poem is, I couldn't find it in the books I have of his.
Well, he quotes your poem, "They are killing all the young men."
Oh yeah. Well, about the assassination of
Malcolm X, yeah.
Of Malcolm X. Yeah. And undercover.
This is so powerful. If you don't have it, David, I'm going to read this little excerpt. This is a bulletin. Malcolm X shot several times in Audubon Ballroom. Don't Negroes meet in the strangest places? Later in his narrative voice. And then this is the excerpt. This is back to Thomas. He had significant details of the Thin Times today tells of 3 black scrub women put to work on the blood, just as the handymen of Harlem were put to work after the riots, patching up. 3 scrub women scrubbing up blood, their blood, in time for a Brooklyn social club's dance that night. The Audubon must go on. I don't know. I think this poetry just seems so resonant with today. And I wonder if we could conclude maybe just talking about that a little bit. First of all, you'd think that from the early 60s until now that we would have made progress in civil rights and civil decency and civil discourse and multiculturalism, but it seems like we've gone backward instead of forward in some ways. We have the laws, right? We have the civil rights laws, but do we have the community of civil rights that was prophesized? And how is it that this work, this revolutionary work about a revolutionary time, just seems so current? I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that. Some of you who've read the work and know its power.
Well, people used to say, a lot of people, used to talk about the Old South, and I will always say, I spent time with the Free Southern Theater in New Orleans during the Civil Rights Movement. And I said, it hasn't changed at all. That was my feeling. And people always, argue. They used to have something called the New South, but I think that it's kind of, it's there. And I thought, I'm guessing this, but some of the reason for the racism is that, and hatred is that the Moors were in, for several centuries in Spain, running Spain as I understand it, and Othello, in southern Italy. So I don't know if that's still a memory in the psyche of the Americans, but that was around, I think that ended in 1492, they say. That, I don't know.
Well, we have some people living in the South, Kathy Lou Schultz, Laura Verana. I don't know if you want to make any comments about what's happening in this country, but with COVID-19 targeting communities, minority communities, and particularly New York City, my students of color have lost so many family members in the last 2-3 months.
Wow.
It's incredible. And in New York City. And just our hearts are just kind of broken here. I know
Yeah.
some of you are there right now along with David. I'm 100 miles north, my house up here. Haven't been able to get back to my own. I have a tenement apartment with my husband. He's had it 50 years. Just a little bit above the Lower East Side, up on 3rd Avenue and 28th, and we haven't been able to go back. Yeah, haven't been able to go back. Our little tenement, our little 19th century space where the working classes lived. And but anybody have a thought or a comment they want to make about this poetry and its relationship with the times we are in? David Grundy, you're still with us. You're still awake there, David. Would you like to say something?
I want to hear more about Calvin Hernton. You know, he became the biggest poet, downtown. He was, you know, but then you hear he went to read in McDougal Street and $10 an hour. He couldn't stand it. He if he had been a little bit longer, he would have been lionized. But he was the best poet downtown, and he never really got a break.
Yeah, you know, I'm astonished at the depth that. First of all, I want to just say David Grundy's bibliography is extraordinary, but we're dealing with a fair amount of unpublished material. We're also working with his son Anton and his widow Mary, and I think we'll be able to really shed some awfully good light on the totality of his accomplishments. He was an extraordinary poet, David, as you know. Yeah. He was magnetic. Yeah. He'd walk into a room and he was Calvin, you know. Yeah. There was really nobody quite like him. And I was just texting with Kathy, and you were so much his little brother. It was a very special relationship. So I'm quite excited about that. But I was thinking about Barrett's earlier question about surrealism, and I was thinking with Calvin, one of the significant avenues of surrealism really was through people like Eliot. It really was through the classical surrealist sources of modernism. And I think that as more work is done on the people associated with Umbra, the diversity and the differences will start to emerge. I think we'll be in a better position to be able to appreciate the uniqueness. Listening to the poetry that was read today, I think should highlight that this was not a homogeneous group in any way. I think one of the strengths of Umbra, I think of people like Victor Hernandez Cruz, who's telling me about the COVID-19 situation in Morocco right now. These are not people who sound like each other, but it was the kind of environment that was able to nurture diversity. And that's why I think David's focus on the post-Umbra evolutions of all of these figures is so important, because it's like saying, well, John Ashbery was a New York school poet. Well, yes, I mean, you could say, or, you know, Clark Coolidge jokes about, first I was a jazz poet, then I was a beat poet, then I was a New York school poet, then I was a language poet. You know, I think Umbra was a kind of moment that people went through and then blossomed. So I'm looking forward to I'm excited about the interest, very grateful for the opportunity for us to come together. David, your Umbra event in New York, of course, was memorable. So, you know, here's to more, and look forward to everybody being in contact.
Did you get any photos from there? That's one thing.
Where?
From that thing in New York.
Oh yeah, lots. Oh, I have lots. Lots. I'll send it to you. Tons.
Yes, because the one I hired for, she had a stomachache and she went home.
Oh, I have pictures of Edie Shockley. I have pictures of you. I've got pictures of JP. I've got lots of pictures. Joe Johnson. I've got pictures of Steve Cannon.
Oh, that would be wonderful, because you know we never able to you know, we were focusing on the Koreans serving all these dishes, and they did a great job.
That long table.
Right. Thank you. I'd love to see it. You have my. Oh, that would be great. You know, and by the way, Calvin had a big voice. You know, he loved theater, and so he could really shout him down. He was wonderful that way. You know.
Here is Calvin Hernton's his own recollections in that issue of the African American Review. I was proud to be a part of Umbra and the Lower East Side. The thrill of the readings would send chills up my spine. We became famous on the Lower East Side for our readings. The sheer anticipation of the readings was invigorating and renewing. We behaved like a dynamic, well-rehearsed Black arts poetry machine.
That's where David's book got its title from.
That was, we never rehearsed or specifically practiced as a group for our readings. After readings, we would form a line across the front of an audience in a bar, church, living room, auditorium, theater, on a street corner or pier. And we would just read without having planned who would go first or what would be read, without any prearranged order whatsoever. Poets, we behaved in the tradition of the jazz jam session. Spontaneity and improvisation were our guides. What a great way to end our panel, our reading. To remember that spontaneity, we academics get all programmed and into non-spontaneity, but let's not do that. Let's do what they did and still do. And I'm really sorry we couldn't get Lennox Raphael. That's such a disappointment. He's been so excited and so gracious in his communications, and he's living right outside of Copenhagen right now. And we just really miss hearing from him. But Lori, you're in touch, so you'll give him our best and tell him, that we know he was here on the fringes of Wi-Fi periphery zones. The zone of Zoom he was in, but he just didn't quite make it onto the video and the sound.
Well, that was the farthest distance, right? He was the farthest away of anyone, right?
Yeah, because David's in the UK, so I guess Denmark's just a little further over.
Well, it's quite a ways over.
We also,
he really wanted to be here.
We have some Chinese guests too, and I don't know if they're in China. I don't know if any of them want to speak.
I'm teaching in China right now, by the way.
Hello, everybody. I think a few of my students are here, so I love you and thank you. I miss you.
Everybody. Okay, so any other comments or questions before we sign off? It's been wonderful to see you all.
Thank you, Laura and Janelle and everybody else who worked on this.
Yes.
Yeah, well done. So are you going to make copies?
Thank you, everyone.
We have a Zoom recording and we'll send it to you, David, and we can also post it on YouTube, but sometimes the quality is something led to, that we would desire for greater quality. Carla was not happy with her reading quality last week, Carla Harriman. I see Tonya returned, so hi, Tonya. James, Steve, and David, thank you so much for coming and staying up for us. Hi, Robert. And a lot of people are treating this as a radio program, I think. And so we're glad that they could show up, even if they're in a darkened screen. Hi, Carla.
This is great. Yeah. Hey, all right. UPenn, did you see the thing in the New Yorker about UPenn? Malcolm Gladwell. He said that he did his own assessment of the colleges in the U.S. He said that Penn was #1.
#1 in what?
Academics. I think academics.
#1 in money.
Really? Well, I mean, I like the fact that he didn't rely on the World Report, something the ones who've been doing it for years. He used some other kind of criteria.
David, to revert to my early resentments, as a graduate of the University of Columbia and a teacher at Penn State, he's just fucked up and wrong.
Well, here we go again. Back to the drawing board. And, oh my goodness.
So hope to see some of you turn out for Schultz and Schultz.
Yes.
Determined. Tentatively a couple of weeks from now, and probably resuming on Thursday nights. And we'll talk with my co-host Janelle Poe, Doug Bevins, if he wants to continue this summer. And I can't wait for Schultz and Schultz. That's going to be a real event.
Well, you're a natural. You're a TV natural. Right. You know, hold on.
I'm the first TV generation, you know. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, this was
We're
great. This
watching
was
Captain Kangaroo.
What is that?
Oh,
I
there's a-
smacked it. Yes, we had some kind of creature flying on
I
us.
see
Oh,
that.
there it is. You know,
I'm saying
I know.
prayers.
It's fighting. The bugs want to take over.
So great to see you, Em. Thanks for your help, Carla.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
You're
so
beautiful.
much.